The angel number that appears after you lose someone you love. You noticed it first on the nightstand clock. 1010, glowing in the dark, 3 nights in a row after the funeral. Then it followed you. A receipt total at the grocery store, a license plate at a red light, the channel number on a television nobody was watching. You told yourself it was coincidence. Grief makes people search for meaning everywhere, and you did not want to be the person clinging to signs out of desperation, but the pattern kept returning at moments too specific to explain away. Here is the first layer of what is happening. When someone you love dies, your mind does not simply stop noticing them. It redirects that attention outward, and it starts recognizing a pattern connected to them long before you consciously understand what you're looking at. That recognition is real. It is a documented shift in attention, not a distracted mind inventing meaning from static. But this repeating pattern is doing something more specific than offering comfort. It is marking a moment. It is naming something that changed the day they left. And in the next few minutes, you will understand exactly what this number is, why it chose this particular timing, and what it is quietly asking you to notice next. The day the signal started. Grief changes how you notice the world. In the first days after losing someone, most people describe the opposite of numbness. Their senses feel sharpened, almost raw, as if attention itself has nowhere else to go. That sharpened attention is the exact environment in which a pattern like this one starts to register. You may not remember the very first time it happened. Maybe it was a microwave clock at 2 in the morning when sleep would not come. Maybe it was scrawled across a parking receipt you almost threw away. The specifics blur, but the feeling does not. A small jolt, a pause, a sense that something just happened and you cannot fully explain it. At first you dismiss it. Coincidence is the easiest explanation, and it protects you from hoping in a moment when hope feels dangerous. But then it happens again. And again, spaced out just enough that pattern recognition kicks in without your permission. This is where most people get stuck, and where most explanations fail them completely. They are told the pattern is either meaningless static or absolute proof of contact, with nothing allowed in between. Neither extreme respects what is actually happening to you. The truth sits in a more precise place. Your mind, still reorganizing itself around a loss, has started tracking a specific numerical pattern because something inside you linked it to the person you lost, often before you consciously decided to. That link did not appear from nothing. It was built in the days surrounding the loss, sometimes at the hospital, sometimes at the funeral, sometimes inside a memory you have not fully sat with yet. Here is the detail almost nobody explains clearly. This pattern is not just repeating on its own schedule. It is repeating at moments that carry emotional weight, when you are thinking about them, missing them, or facing a decision they would have had an opinion about. That timing is not something your conscious mind can fake or manufacture. You cannot will a clock to match a certain number the exact second you glance at it, 3 separate times, in 3 separate places, across a week you were barely holding together. Something else is doing the timing. There's one more piece worth naming before we go further. People who track this pattern closely often notice it intensifies around anniversaries, birthdays, and the ordinary Tuesday afternoons nobody else remembers as significant. That detail matters more than it seems. It suggests the pattern is not attached to grand occasions. It is attached to you, and to the private moments only you and the person you lost would recognize as meaningful. In the next section, you will learn exactly what number has been finding you. You will learn why it carries this specific meaning, and why grief is the precise emotional state that makes it visible in the first place. What 1010 actually means. The number is 1010. Say it out loud if you need to. 1010. The same 2 digits doubled, appearing on clocks, receipts, addresses, and screens at moments too precise to be nothing. Now here is what it actually means, stated plainly, without the vague language most explanations rely on. 1010 is read as 2 complete cycles of 1, sitting side by side. In numerology, the number 1 represents a beginning, a new identity, a fresh direction after something ends. The 0 beside it does not weaken that meaning. It amplifies it, the way an echo makes a single sound feel larger than it was. Two ones, split by two zeros, form a structure that repeats the same idea twice. Something has ended, and something is beginning, and both are happening at once. That is why this number so often appears immediately after a loss. It is not comforting you with softness. It is marking a threshold, the exact point where an old chapter closes and a new one you did not choose, starts anyway. This is where most people misread the message entirely. They assume a number appearing after death means the person is still nearby in some literal sense, watching, sending messages, still involved in daily decisions. That interpretation feels good, but it flattens something more precise into something vague. 1010 is not primarily about their continued presence. It is about your transition. It is marking the fact that you are now living inside a version of your life that did not exist before they died, and that version needs to be built, not simply endured. That distinction changes everything about how you respond to seeing it. If you treat 1010 only as a message from them, you may spend months waiting for further contact, checking clocks with increasing anxiety, needing the number to keep appearing in order to feel connected. If you understand it as a marker of your own threshold, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes permission to begin, even while still grieving. Permission to build a next chapter without treating that as a betrayal of the one that just ended. Both readings can coexist, and by the end of this video you will see exactly how. But for now, hold this. The number is not empty noise, and it is not proof of an afterlife conversation either. It is not a hollow coincidence dressed up to look meaningful, and it is not undeniable proof either. It sits in the space between those two extremes, and that space is exactly where real meaning tends to live. Most people spend their whole lives avoiding that space, uncomfortable with anything that cannot be fully proven or fully dismissed. Grief, in a strange way, pushes you directly into it, whether you were ready or not. Why it finds you in ordinary moments. If 1010 were only meant to comfort you, it would likely appear during the hardest moments. The nights you cry, the anniversaries, the birthdays that now carry a different weight. But that is rarely how people describe it. Instead, it shows up while paying for coffee, while scrolling through a phone at a red light, while folding laundry, half distracted, thinking about something completely unrelated to grief. That detail confused researchers studying pattern recognition long before angel numbers became a popular phrase. If a pattern only mattered during peak emotional intensity, it would only appear then. The fact that it appears during ordinary low-stakes moments points to something different happening underneath. Your mind is not waiting for permission to notice this pattern. It has already decided the pattern matters, and it now flags it constantly in the background, the same way it flags a familiar voice in a crowded room. This is called salience, and it explains far more than most spiritual explanations bother to. Once your brain assigns emotional significance to a specific pattern, that pattern becomes impossible to ignore, even in contexts that have nothing to do with grief on the surface. You are not manufacturing these sightings. You are not being overly sensitive or dramatic. Your attention system has been permanently recalibrated by loss, and 1010 is simply the frequency it now catches, the way a radio catches one station clearly out of dozens of others playing static. Here is the detail that changes how most people feel about this. The ordinary moments are not accidents in the pattern. They are the point. If the number only appeared during grief, it would only reinforce your sadness. Appearing during ordinary life does something different. It threads the loss into the fabric of your everyday moments, gently, without demanding a breakdown every time you see it. It says the person you lost is not confined to funerals and anniversaries. They are stitched into folding laundry, into red lights, into the very ordinary texture of a life that is still somehow continuing. That is not a small thing. For many people, it is the first evidence that life after loss can hold both grief and normalcy in the same breath, rather than treating them as opposites that cancel each other out. It also means you do not have to go looking for the number to feel close to them. It will find you on its own schedule, inside a life you are still fully allowed to live. The next layer explains why that coexistence matters more than it might seem right now. The difference between missing someone and being reached. Missing someone is a private act. It happens inside you, directed outward toward a person who cannot respond. Being reached feels different, even if it is harder to explain. It carries a sense of exchange, however small, as if something crossed the distance in both directions instead of just one. Most people who see 1010 repeatedly describe both experiences, often within the same week, and struggle to tell them apart. Here is a distinction worth sitting with. Missing someone tends to arrive with a specific memory attached, a smell, a phrase they used to say, a particular chair they always sat in. The ache has a shape, because it is tied to something concrete you are recalling. Being reached, on the other hand, tends to arrive without a memory attached at all. You are not thinking about them in that exact second. The number simply appears, unprompted, and the feeling of connection arrives before your mind has time to build a reason for it. That order matters more than it seems. When the feeling precedes the memory, it is harder to dismiss as manufactured longing, because longing usually needs a trigger. This does not. This is where most people quietly draw a line they never say out loud. They start to believe, even if they never tell anyone, that some sightings are their own grieving mind at work, and others are something closer to a real crossing. Both categories are valid, and neither should be dismissed to please a purely rational explanation or a purely spiritual one. What matters is not proving which sightings belong in which category. What matters is noticing that you already, instinctively, sort them without being taught how. That instinct is worth trusting more than most people allow themselves to. It means part of you already understands the difference between longing for someone and sensing that a thread between you has not fully closed. That understanding did not come from a book or a video. It came from paying attention to your own experience long enough to notice the pattern within the pattern. It also explains why some sightings leave you shaken in a way that lingers for hours, while others pass through you quickly, noted, and then released. The lingering ones tend to be the ones being reached. The quick ones tend to be missing them, quietly in passing, the way grief moves through an ordinary afternoon. The next section explains why your brain was primed to notice any of this at all, and why that priming began earlier than you might expect. Why your brain was already looking for this. Deep inside your brainstem sits a small cluster of neurons called the reticular activating system. Its job is simple. It decides what reaches your conscious awareness and what gets filtered out as background noise. Every second, your senses take in far more information than you could ever consciously process. Most of it never reaches you at all. The reticular activating system quietly discards it, keeping only what it has decided matters. This is why, once you buy a certain car, you suddenly see that same car everywhere. Nothing changed about how many exist on the road. Your filter changed. The cars were always there unnoticed, waiting for your attention to catch up to them. Grief works on that same system, but with far higher stakes attached. When someone you love dies, your brain does not simply lose access to them. It reorganizes an enormous amount of internal wiring that used to be devoted to predicting their next move, their voice, their presence in a room. That wiring does not disappear. It gets repurposed. Here is the detail that reframes everything you have been experiencing. Numbers connected to that person become flagged by this same filtering system as significant. A birthday, an address, a hospital room, a date that mattered more than most. Your brain starts surfacing them constantly, exactly the way it surfaces the car you just bought. You are not imagining a connection. Your filtering system built one, using the exact material grief gave it to work with. This explains why the sightings intensified after the loss rather than before it. The pattern was likely always present in the world around you, in the ordinary statistical noise of daily life. What changed was your filter, not the frequency of the number itself. That does not make the experience less meaningful. It makes it more explainable, and for many grieving people, explainable is exactly what they need in order to trust what they are feeling, instead of doubting it. Trust in the middle of grief is fragile. Anything that helps rebuild it deserves to be taken seriously, not dismissed. There is a deeper layer here that pure neuroscience cannot fully answer, though. Why this specific number, and not another one entirely unrelated to your loss? Neuroscience can explain how a filter works. It cannot fully explain why one specific number, out of infinite possibilities, became the one your filter chose to elevate above every other. That question belongs to a different kind of explanation, one that treats numbers as more than statistics, and the next section walks directly into it. 2 complete cycles. 1 shared message. Ancient numerology never treated numbers as arbitrary labels. Each one was considered a compressed idea, a small container holding a specific kind of meaning that repeated across cultures and centuries. The number 1, across nearly every numerological tradition, represents singularity. A single point, a beginning that has not yet been shaped by outside influence. The number 0 represents something almost opposite, and far stranger to describe. It is not absence. It is potential before form, the space a new beginning is born from. 1010 places these 2 ideas beside each other twice, deliberately, as if the message needed repeating to be trusted. Read slowly. It says something close to this. A beginning, held inside potential, completed, and then immediately a second beginning, held inside a second potential, completed again. That structure mirrors exactly what happens after losing someone you love, whether you have consciously noticed it or not. The first ending was theirs. Their life, their presence, their voice in the room, all completed in a single, devastating moment you likely remember with painful clarity. The second beginning is yours. And this is the part almost nobody names directly because it feels uncomfortable to say out loud so soon after a loss. You are also beginning again, whether you feel ready or not. Not replacing them, not moving past them as if they mattered less. Simply continuing to exist in a world that now requires a version of you that did not need to exist before they died. 1010 is not asking you to celebrate that beginning. It is only naming that it has already started. Quietly, underneath the grief you are still actively living through. Here is the piece that changes how heavy this feels. You do not have to choose between honoring them and beginning again. The number itself refuses that choice by placing both cycles side by side, equal in weight, neither canceling the other out. Grief and beginning are not opposites competing for space inside you. According to this pattern, they were always meant to sit together, and the discomfort you may feel about that is not a sign you are grieving wrong. It is simply the discomfort of holding 2 true things at once, which is exactly what this number has been quietly asking you to practice since the day it first appeared. That practice gets easier with repetition. The same way any unfamiliar posture becomes easier the more often your body is asked to hold it. The guilt of feeling comforted. There is a moment many grieving people never admit to anyone. The moment 1010 appears, and instead of pain, you feel something closer to relief. And immediately after that relief, guilt arrives right behind it. You may wonder how you can feel comforted by a number when the person you love is gone. You may wonder if noticing patterns like this means you are avoiding the full weight of the loss, distracting yourself with something easier to hold than raw grief. This guilt deserves to be named directly, because silence around it only makes it heavier. Comfort is not betrayal. Feeling less pain in one specific moment does not erase the depth of what you lost. It does not mean you loved them any less than the grief itself suggests. Grief is not a single unbroken wave of suffering that must remain constant to prove its authenticity. It moves. It has texture. Some moments crush you completely. Other moments, sometimes triggered by nothing more than 2 glowing digits on a clock, offer a small pocket of ease. Both moments are equally real, and neither one disqualifies the other. Here is the detail that most people never consider, and it is worth sitting with. If the person you lost could see your guilt over feeling comforted, most descriptions of love suggest they would not want that guilt for you. Love, even from a distance, does not typically ask for continuous suffering as proof of its sincerity. Think of someone you have loved and lost. Would you want them carrying guilt over a small moment of ease? Most people answer that question instantly, and the answer is almost always no. That does not mean you should force comfort or pretend the number fixes anything. It does not. Grief still requires its own time, unrushed, and no pattern can shortcut that process. But when comfort does arrive, uninvited, through a repeating number that seems to know exactly when you need it most. You are allowed to receive it without treating it as a failure of your grief. Receive it fully, even briefly. It does not owe you an explanation, and neither do you. This permission is not something anyone can give you completely. It has to be practiced moment by moment, each time the guilt shows up trying to cancel the relief before it can settle. Some days the practice will fail and the guilt will win. That failure does not undo the progress made on the days it does not. The next section addresses a fear that often follows this one closely, what it means when the signs eventually slow down or stop appearing altogether. When the signs go quiet, at some point, usually months after the loss, the sightings slow down. Weeks pass without a single 1010, then longer stretches. Then for some people, the number seems to disappear almost entirely. This shift terrifies people more than almost anything else in the grieving process. The fear is rarely spoken aloud, but it sounds something like this. If the signs are stopping, does that mean the connection is fading? Does it mean you are being forgotten, or worse, that you are the one forgetting? Neither fear matches what is actually happening. Remember the filtering system from earlier, the one responsible for surfacing this pattern in the first place. That system does not run at a fixed intensity forever. It calibrates based on emotional urgency, and emotional urgency naturally shifts as grief moves through its later stages. This does not mean the grief has ended. It means your nervous system is no longer operating in the heightened, hyper-vigilant state it needed during the earliest and most raw phase of loss. The signal was never about how much you loved them. It was about how urgently your mind needed a bridge back to them, while the loss was still an open wound. As the wound begins to close, even slightly, the bridge does not need to be rebuilt as constantly. This is the part almost nobody explains clearly, and it is worth repeating directly. A quieter pattern is not a weaker connection. It is often a sign that you are integrating the loss, rather than being consumed by it every single day. Integration does not mean forgetting. It means the person you lost is no longer only accessible through moments of acute pain. They are becoming part of your ongoing life instead of a wound you keep reopening to feel close to them. Some people do continue seeing 1010 for years on a lighter occasional rhythm, appearing during meaningful moments rather than constant ones. Others notice it fade almost completely once the sharpest phase of grief has passed. Both outcomes are normal, and neither one should be treated as evidence about how much you loved someone or how much they still matter to you. If the number has already gone quiet for you, this is not a warning that something went wrong. It is simply naming a phase many people move through without anyone explaining it to them first. The next layer moves towards something more practical. How to carry this person forward without needing the number to keep proving they are still with you. Carrying someone without holding on. There is a difference between carrying someone and holding on to them, though the two often feel identical in the early months of grief. Holding on tends to look like waiting for the next sighting, waiting for a dream that feels significant enough to count as contact, waiting for a feeling that confirms, one more time, that they have not truly left. Carrying someone looks different, and it develops slowly, often without you noticing the shift happening in real time. It looks like making a decision the way they would have made it, without needing a sign to confirm you got it right. It looks like telling a story about them that makes someone else laugh, without needing to cry immediately afterward. It looks like living a Tuesday afternoon fully, rather than treating full presence in your own life as a betrayal of theirs. Here is the part worth sitting with before moving forward. Most people assume carrying someone requires less attachment than holding on does. The opposite tends to be true. Holding on often requires external proof, repeated constantly, to feel secure in the connection. Carrying someone requires internal trust, the kind that does not collapse the moment a week goes by without seeing 1010 anywhere. That trust is not something you manufacture through willpower. It builds gradually, through the accumulation of moments where you make a choice, remember them, and keep moving, all without needing external confirmation that the choice was correct. 1010 played an important role in getting you here. It offered proof during the phase of grief when proof felt necessary just to keep functioning. That proof was not a small thing. It was often the difference between getting out of bed and staying under the covers. But its job was never to be needed forever. Its job was to bridge you from a state of raw, desperate searching toward a state of quieter, steadier caring. That steadier state is one where the connection lives inside you, rather than in a repeating pattern on a clock. That transition does not happen on a fixed timeline, and it is not linear. Some days you will need the sign again, and that is allowed. Grieving does not move in a straight line, and neither does this shift. Give it room to move at its own pace. That difference will not always be obvious in the moment. Learning to recognize it takes practice and a little patience with yourself along the way. The next section explains how to tell the difference between a real sign and a moment where longing alone is doing all the work. Letting go is not the same as losing them. Somewhere in the middle of grief, a specific fear tends to surface, and it often arrives disguised as a completely different worry. You may start to fear that healing itself is a kind of loss, that if the pain softens or the sightings slow or a day passes where you did not think of them until evening, you are somehow losing them all over again. This time, the fear says, by your own doing. This fear deserves to be dismantled directly because it quietly sabotages more healing than almost anything else in the grieving process. Letting go, in the way grief actually requires it, does not mean releasing the person. It means releasing the specific shape your relationship with them used to take, because that shape is no longer available to you, no matter how tightly you hold on. You are not letting go of them. You are letting go of a version of your life that included their physical presence and allowing a new version to form that includes their absence instead, alongside everything they still mean to you. Read that again slowly if it needs to sink in. It took most people multiple attempts before it truly landed. That distinction is not just semantic, it changes what healing actually asks of you. Here is the detail that reframes this fear completely. 1010, in its structure, already contains this exact idea. One cycle completing, and a second beginning immediately beside it, neither erasing the other. Your relationship with them is not ending because you are healing. It is changing shape, the same way the number itself represents an ending and a beginning occupying the same moment without contradiction. People who resist this shift often find themselves stuck, unable to move forward, out of fear that moving forward equals forgetting. People who accept it often describe something unexpected. The connection does not weaken, it becomes less painful to access, which allows them to return to it more often, not less. Letting go, understood this way, is not the opposite of love. It is what allows love to continue existing inside a life that must, despite everything, keep moving forward. Keep moving forward gently. Nobody is asking you to rush. This reframing does not erase the fear completely. It gives you something steadier to return to whenever the fear resurfaces uninvited. The next section addresses something practical many viewers ask directly. How to know whether a sighting is meaningful or whether grief alone is doing all the interpreting. How to tell a real sign from wishful thinking. This question comes up constantly, and it deserves an honest answer rather than a reassuring one. Not every 1010 you notice will carry equal weight. Some will simply be the ordinary statistical presence of a common number, spotted because your filtering system now flags it automatically, regardless of context. Others will feel different, and that difference is worth learning to recognize. Start with timing. A sighting that lines up with a specific private moment tends to carry more weight. A thought about them, a question you wished you could ask them, a decision you were unsure how to make. That kind of sighting outweighs one that appears while you are simply going about an unrelated task. Next, consider the feeling itself, not just the number. Meaningful sightings tend to arrive with a distinct physical sensation, a slight chill, a pause in your breathing, a feeling of being noticed rather than simply noticing something yourself. Some people describe it as a warmth spreading through the chest. Others describe stillness as if the room itself paused for a second alongside them. Sightings driven purely by longing tend to feel more effortful. You go looking for the number actively, hoping to find it, and when you do, the relief feels manufactured rather than received. Here is the part worth holding on to through the rest of this section. The goal is not to achieve perfect certainty about which sightings count and which do not. That certainty does not exist, and chasing it will exhaust you. The goal is to develop enough trust in your own discernment that you stop needing outside validation for every single sighting. Grieving people often ask other people to confirm whether a sign was real, hoping an outside voice can settle the uncertainty for them. But nobody else was there, at that clock, at that exact second, carrying that exact memory. Only you have access to that context. This means the discernment ultimately belongs to you, and building trust in your own reading of these moments is part of the healing this entire pattern has been quietly pointing toward since it first appeared. That trust is not about being right every time. It is about no longer needing to be right in order to feel steady. Give yourself permission to be wrong occasionally, and to still trust the sightings that matter most. Trust builds slowly. Do not expect it to arrive all at once. The next section explains what actually shifts internally once that steadiness begins to take hold. The shift that happens once you stop fighting it. For a long stretch of grief, most people fight the pattern without realizing that is what they are doing. They fight it by demanding it appear more often, treating a quiet week as evidence of abandonment. They also fight it by demanding it mean only one specific thing, either purely spiritual or purely coincidental, refusing to let it sit anywhere in between. Fighting a pattern like this drains an enormous amount of energy that grief already claims more than enough of on its own. Something shifts once that fight ends. People who reach this point tend to describe it in strikingly similar language, even though they arrive there through completely different losses. The number stops feeling like a test you might fail. It starts feeling like a companion that shows up when it shows up, without needing you to control its timing or interpret it correctly every single time. Here is what that shift actually changes on a practical level. You stop checking clocks compulsively, searching for the number out of anxious need. You start simply noticing it calmly when it happens to appear. That change in posture, from searching to noticing, is one of the clearest markers that grief is integrating rather than staying stuck in its rawest phase. It does not mean the loss hurts less in some absolute sense. It means the loss has found a place to live inside your daily life that does not require constant, exhausting vigilance to maintain the connection. People often ask what caused this shift, expecting a specific technique or ritual. Most of the time, there was no technique. There was simply time. Time combined with a slow, repeated practice of letting the number mean what it meant, without forcing more onto it than it could hold. That practice, more than any single insight in this video, is what ultimately determines how this pattern settles into your life over the coming months. Be patient with yourself while that settling happens. It rarely follows a straight line, and setbacks do not erase the ground already gained. Some weeks will feel like progress. Others will feel like standing still. Both belong to the same process. The next section moves toward something quieter, and perhaps more important than everything discussed so far. What this entire pattern has actually been preparing you for. Stay with that question for a moment before moving forward. It matters more than it first appears, even if the reason is not obvious yet. What this number is quietly preparing you for. It would be simpler if 1010 existed only to comfort you in the immediate aftermath of loss, and then quietly faded once its job was finished. But people who track this pattern over longer periods, sometimes years, describe something more layered than simple comfort. The number tends to reappear at specific junctures beyond the initial grief. A new relationship beginning. A career decision the person you lost would have had strong opinions about. A move to a new city. A moment where you finally do something you had been afraid to attempt while they were alive. Notice how none of those moments are about death directly. They are about growth. Arriving through a doorway grief first opened. This pattern of reappearance is not a coincidence stacked on top of another coincidence. Remember what 1010 structurally represents. 2 cycles of ending and beginning, occupying the same space without contradiction. That structure does not apply only once at the moment of loss. It applies every time your life reaches a genuine threshold, a point where an old version of you needs to end so a new version can begin. Here's the detail worth sitting with directly. The number is not just marking that you lost someone. It is marking that you are someone who continues to grow through thresholds, and it may keep appearing at each significant one, whether or not that threshold has anything directly to do with grief. This reframes the entire pattern in a way many people find unexpectedly reassuring. 1010 is not a symbol permanently tied to death and mourning. It is a symbol tied to transition itself. Death happened to be the transition that first made you sensitive enough to notice it. That sensitivity does not disappear once the sharpest grief has passed. It becomes a permanent part of how you move through major life changes, alert to thresholds in a way you were not before this loss forced you to become. In a strange, indirect way, the person you lost gave you this awareness, even though they did not intend to. They would likely never have wanted the loss itself to be the price of it. Still, the awareness is yours to keep, regardless of the price that came with it. Nobody can take it from you now. Carry it forward gently, into whatever threshold comes next. There will be more than one. There always is, for as long as you keep growing. The final section brings this entire pattern together and addresses the message underneath everything discussed so far. The message. Underneath the message. Every layer explored so far has treated 1010 as something meaningful in its own right, a pattern worth decoding, a structure worth understanding. But there is one more layer, quieter than the rest, that most explanations never reach. The number itself is not actually the message, it is the messenger, the delivery mechanism for something far simpler than numerology, psychology, or spiritual tradition usually admit. Underneath every sighting, every clock, every receipt, every license plate carrying this pattern, sits one plain sentence, stripped of all decoration. It says this: you are still connected, and it is safe to keep living. That sentence sounds almost too simple after everything explored in the previous sections. But simplicity is often what grief actually needs. It gets buried beneath the complexity we build around it, trying to make sense of something that resists sense entirely. Here is why this distinction matters practically. If you treat the number itself as the message, you will spend years needing it to keep appearing. You will parse each sighting for hidden meaning, exhausting yourself trying to stay fluent in a language that was never meant to be studied that closely. If you understand the number as a messenger, its job changes. It only needs to deliver the sentence once, clearly enough that you finally believe it. After that, the messenger can rest, appearing occasionally gently, without needing to prove anything all over again each time. Let it rest when it needs to. That rest is not disappearance. It is trust, finally settling into place. Have you believed the sentence yet? You are still connected, and it is safe to keep living. Not safe in the sense of forgetting them or moving past them, but safe in the sense that continuing your life does not erase the one that came before it. Most people who reach this point in their grief describe a specific kind of relief, quieter than the relief of the earliest sightings. It is the relief of no longer needing constant proof, because the message has finally landed somewhere permanent, somewhere that does not depend on a clock reading a certain number at the right second. That permanence is the actual destination this entire pattern has been guiding you toward, chapter by chapter, sighting by sighting, since the very first night you noticed it on your nightstand. Believe it now, if you have not already. That belief is the whole point. Nothing more needs to be added to it. One thing remains before you go, and it is the most important part. What 1010 wants you to carry forward. Think back to the nightstand clock, glowing in the dark on a night you could not sleep. At the time, it likely felt small, a strange coincidence, easy to dismiss, easy to explain away with tiredness or grief playing tricks on an exhausted mind. But you kept noticing it, and that persistence, more than the number itself, is what eventually led you here. Everything explored in this video points toward one closing truth. 1010 was never asking you to prove anything, to yourself or to anyone else. It was not a test of your love, a measurement of your grief, or a scoreboard tracking how connected you remain to someone who is gone. It was an invitation, repeated patiently, until you were ready to accept it. An invitation to notice that endings and beginnings can occupy the same moment without canceling each other out. An invitation to feel comforted without guilt. an invitation to let go of a shape your relationship used to take, without letting go of the relationship itself. Most importantly, it was an invitation to keep living fully, without treating your own continued life as a betrayal of the one you lost. Nobody could have handed you that invitation directly. It had to arrive quietly, disguised as 2 repeating digits, until you were finally ready to open it. Now you have. That, in itself, is enough. Here is what to carry forward from everything explored today. You do not need the number to keep appearing in order for the message to remain true. The message was always the point, not the messenger. You are still connected and it is safe to keep living. If 1010 continues appearing after today, notice it with the same openness that brought you to this video in the first place. And if it slowly fades, trust that its quieting does not mean the connection is fading with it. Trust that quiet, the same way you learned to trust the noise before it. Some things do not need constant proof once they have been truly understood. This is one of them. Wherever you are tonight, whatever clock you happen to glance at next, carry this forward. The person you lost helped shape who you are becoming, and that shaping did not end the day they did. It continues quietly, every time you choose to keep living with an open heart instead of a closed one. That choice, more than any number, is the real sign worth trusting. Thank you for staying until the end of this video. Whatever tonight brings you, may it bring you a little peace.